Chapter 18. John hardly knew where to begin in his search for news of Kit. The whole ship was in such a state of chaos that he felt almost lost even in the most familiar quarters. There were gaping holes in the sides where French cannonballs had smashed right through the Fearless's timbers. Up above, on deck, the sails were in tatters, torn to rags by grape shot. Splinters and spars lay everywhere, and the decks were red and slippery with blood. He was in too much of a hurry to look closely at the French ship, which now lay quietly alongside. But a quick glance showed him that her masts had been shot away, and her rigging and sails lay half submerged in the sea. The French sailors, sullen and defeated, were being mustered on deck by gleeful British midshipmen. Hurrying through the debris, stepping over exhausted men, John hunted for Tom. Tom had been the one who'd known about Kit. He'd known what happened. Instead of Tom, he found Jabez Barton. The gunner's mate, with ruffled Horace clinging to his shoulders, was gathering up blood-stained cutlasses, which had been assembled in a pile on the deck. Though his face was blackened with gunpowder, his eyes brightened at the sight of John. "Hey, lad, you did well. I seen you. Up in the battle, up and down, dodging in and out, more like an imp of Satan than one of God's own creatures. You'll be the speediest powder monkey in the fleet, I'll be bound." "Mr. Barton, Tom told me about Kit." Jabez shook his head sorrowfully. "Aye, poor boy. Nasty wound in the shoulder. I seen him fall, myself." "Where is what did they do with the body?" "With the?" Jabez looked puzzled. "Oh, you mean—" "No. No doubt they cast him overboard, John, down into the deep, like all the other poor brave fellows. 'Tis a dismal thing to think on, the end of a boy's life. For all he weren't naught but a skinny, sour, unhappy bit of lad, but even so—" "Sour? He was never sour," John said hotly. "He's my friend, best I ever had." Jabez looked surprised. "Nate Claypole, your friend?" It was John's turn to look bemused. "Why Nate, Mr. Barton? Why do you say Nate?" Jabez shook his head. "Thought you knews. Didn't Tom tell you? How Kit and Nat were up on the deck where their guns was positioned? Well, Nate saw a Frenchie up in the tops aiming his musket, and he jumped right in front of Kit. Took the ball into his own heart. A proper little hero we never knowed he was. Knocked Kit flying. He saved his life. Next ball caught Kit, but only in the shoulder. Down in the operating room he'll be, I don't doubt it. Here, John, where are you going? You don't want to go down there. Horrible it is. Sights to behold down there." But John hadn't waited to hear the end of the speech. He had taken off like a leaping dolphin and was hurtling down the nearest companionway towards the surgeon's lantern-lit domain in the dark bowels of the ship. Even if he hadn't known where to find it, the cries and groans of the injured men would have shown him the way. He hesitated as he drew near, dreading what he might see. Mr. Catskill, the Fearless's surgeon, had set up his operating table at the far end of the cockpit. His broad back half hid the man who was laid stretched out in front of him. But in the light of the lantern swaying overhead, John could see that Mr. Catskill had a saw in his hand, and that he was using it with all his strength on a man's arm. A whistling scream emerged from his patient's throat, in spite of the gag he was biting on, and there was a thud as the severed arm fell away to the floor. John turned away, his stomach rising. One of the surgeon's mates, whose clothes were smeared with blood, pushed past him, a basket of rolled bandages in his hand. Out the way, boy. What you doing here? I'm bugging around here. Getting in the way? I'm looking for a boy. Kit. Kit Smith, said John. Is he here? He has a musket ball on his shoulder. A strange look, almost a smile of amusement, crossed the man's face. Oh, you want Master Kit, do you? Over there. In the corner. Nasty wound, but he'll do. Kit was lying in the quietest part of the cockpit, at the end of a long line of groaning men, who were all waiting for the surgeon's attention. His face, even paler than usual, was contorted with pain, but he smiled at the sight of John. John felt tears start to his eyes. Kit looked smaller, younger, almost like a little boy. I thought Tom said you'd died. No, but Nate did. Kit's voice was weak, and John had to bend down to hear him. He saved my life, John. He was a hero. I know. Mr. Barton told me. I feel so sorry that I wasn't nicer to him. You were better than the rest of us. Kit shook his head fretfully. No, I will always regret. But what about you, Kit? John interrupted. Your wound, is it bad? Kit gritted his teeth as a shaft of pain shot through him. Not as bad as many here. There's a musket ball in my shoulder. Mr. Catskill says he'll take it out when he's finished with the amputations. It will hurt. He tried to put on his Captain Bannerman face. You'll be tested to the limits of your courage, he began, but grimaced and stopped. I'm scared, John. I'm really scared. But the pain won't last, Kit, and you're not going to die. You're going to get better. John tried not to sound as if he was asking a question. When I thought you'd died, You still here? The surgeon's mate was back. If you're going to stay, you can make yourself useful. Fetch your bucket, why don't you, and cart off all the amputated limbs. Then you can start scrubbing the blood off. Oh, no, I must go, John said hastily. He wanted to touch Kit's hand in a farewell gesture, but was afraid of hurting him. Good luck, Kit, with the operation. I'll see you soon. I'll come back as soon as I can. Not down here, you won't. The surgeon's mate was still hovering. This little messmate of yours will be shipped up to the sick bay as soon as Mr. Catskill's done his work. All nice and airy up there. All dainty and quiet. He went off at last, shaking his head and laughing. What's the matter with him? John said, puzzled. He looked down at Kit again, but Kit's eyes had closed, and his lashes lay dark against his chalk-white cheeks. John gratefully gulped in the clean, fresh air when he came back up to the open deck. The ship was already being put to rights. Sailors were swabbing away the sand and blood, while others scrambled around in the rigging, lowering the torn sails. The French prisoners, guarded by Marines, had been herded into their prison quarters below. The guns had been securely lashed, and fresh cannonballs were being brought up to fill the ranks. Nate, thought John. Nate Claypole. Who'd have ever thought it? He could almost see Nate's weaselly face, his pale, sly eyes, and thin, downturned mouth. I only saw him smile once. Nobody liked him. Maybe that was why he was so mean. He tried to summon up a feeling of grief for Nate, but instead he felt only gratitude. Kit was alive. That was the main thing. Kit had been saved. The boatswain's whistle sounded, and a joyful command rang around the ship. Up, spirits! Splice the main brace! Casks of rum were already being brought up from below, and the seamen were gathering around to get their ration. Someone fetched up a fiddle, another a flute, and, as the sun sank down towards the silvery sea, the Fearless settled down to lick her wounds and celebrate her victory. It wasn't until the middle of next morning that John was able to visit Kit again. Mr. Torse had downed his grog the night before, like a man with the thirst of a desert. It had set a kind of rage upon him, and the ship had rung to his curses. Everyone had kept out of his way. John, Tom, and Davy crept off to join their various gun crews, and John, slumped down with his back against the gun, fallen asleep in the middle of a long, rambling story Mr. Stannard was telling about a mermaid he was sure he'd once seen off the coast of China. John woke early, stiff and sore. In the morning, Mr. Torse had been like a wounded bear, growling and snapping at anyone who dared approach him, and setting the boys to start a new task before they'd had a chance to finish the first one. It was Jabez who sent him off at last to visit the sick bay. "Get off you now, John, and find out what that young malingerer Kit is up to," he said, trying to sound severe, with one wary eye on Torse. John shot off at once, darting away as fast as he could before Mr. Torse could call him back. The sick bay was towards the bows of the ships. Hammocks were slung over the guns, which took up most of the space, even here, but the gun ports were open, allowing light and fresh air to penetrate round the sick men. It took John a little while to find Kit, as his hammock was half hidden behind a bulkhead, away from the rest. Kit's eyes were shut, and his face deathly pale. But he heard John approach, and looked up at him. "Have they done it yet? Taken the ball out, I mean," said John. "Yes," smiled Kit weakly. "Last night, it wasn't so bad. They gave me a lot of rum. Drunk as a lord I must have been. I fainted anyway, so I didn't feel it." "Did they say?" "What did they?" John came to an awkward halt. "Oh, it's good," Kit said, understanding him. "No vital organ was touched. I'll be right as soon as the weakness has passed and the healing goes on." John wanted to laugh out loud as a weight seemed to roll off him. "I thought we'd got rid of you at last," he said, grinning cheerfully. "Thought I'd have all your things to call my own." Anxiety sparkled in Kit's eyes. "You didn't. No, you great looby. I didn't look in your precious bag." Kit shifted, trying to raise himself, but winced with pain and sank back. "John, there's something I must tell you." "Tell me? What?" Kit took a breath, but then said nothing. "You can trust me," John said, affronted. "I can keep a secret." "I know, but—" Kit's face was filled with indecision. "Oh yes, you are right. I know I can trust you, and it cannot be hidden any longer. Listen, John, you may not wish to continue being my friend when you know what—" "A visitor, I see," said a disapproving voice. John turned to see Mr. Catskill, the red-faced surgeon, ducking his head under a low beam as he approached with Mr. Erskine just behind him. John tugged his forelock respectfully. "Go away, boy," Mr. Catskill said, with a mighty frown. "I don't permit loafers here. This is a sick bay, not a theatrical spectacle." Mr. Erskine coughed discreetly. Mr. Catskill, I would not wish to countermand your medical rules, but in this instance, especially in the light of the matter we've just been discussing, I would prefer John Barr to stay." The surgeon's brows snapped even closer together. "It's damned irregular, Mr. Erskine." "Quite so," said Mr. Erskine, tactfully. "The responsibility will be mine." The surgeon continued to stare at him. "You've asked me and my orderly to keep this revelation a close secret. Tell the boy what we know. The whole ship will be privy to it before tonight." "I believe not," said Mr. Erskine coolly. "Now, Mr. Catskill, if you please." The surgeon went off, shaking his head. John looked down at Kit, whose face had flushed a dull red. He was looking back at Mr. Erskine, I'm surprised to see a amused smile lift the good side of Mr. Erskine's ravaged face. "Well now, Kit, how are you faring?" Mr. Erskine was saying. "A nasty wound in the shoulder, I believe?" "Yes, but there is no danger. I will soon be well," said Kit, trying again to lift himself. Mr. Erskine put a restraining hand on his good shoulder. "Lie still. You did well, I hear, in the battle. You put yourself constantly in danger in the line of duty." "Not as much as Nate," said Kit. "He saved my life, Mr. Erskine." "I know. It was an act of remarkable courage." Mr. Erskine leaned one blue-sleeved arm comfortably on the barrel of a nearby gun and assumed a conversational tone. "Now, Kit, there is a problem that has been teasing me, and I'm sure you can help me solve it." Kit seemed to relax a little, but a wary look returned to his eyes. "If I can, sir." "You told me that your father was the Marquis de Vaumas." "Yes, sir." "You may remember, Kit, at the time of our last conversation, that your father's name seemed familiar to me." I didn't notice, sir." "I could not, at first, recall the precise circumstances of how and when I had the pleasure of meeting your father, but it gradually came back to me. Your father was in London, shortly before the revolution in Paris. I believe it was at the time of his marriage to your mother. We attended a card party together and conversed for some time." "Did you, sir?" "I was saddened when I heard how he had died, so bravely, so young. His death seemed even more tragic, as his wife was expecting a baby. After he died, she gave birth to his first and only child, a daughter. The daughter's name was, I believe, Catherine." John was looking from Mr. Erskine to Kit and back again, trying to grasp what Mr. Erskine was saying. "You never told me you had a sister, Kit," he said. Mr. Erskine shook his head. "There was no question of a brother or a sister, was there, Kit?" he went on. "Your parents had only one child, a girl, you." "No," began Kit. "You are mistaken, sir. Mr. Erskine frowned. "No more lies, please. You've deceived all of us for a long time. How, I cannot imagine. But you cannot deceive Mr. Catskill, who, while operating on your shoulder, uncovered, that is—" He looked disconcerted for once, and Kit blushed scarlet. John's head seemed to spin. "But that's impossible, Mr. Erskine. Kit isn't a girl, he's a—" But the words died on his lips. He saw, in an instant of complete revelation, that Mr. Erskine was speaking the truth. Kit was a girl. He knew it at once, absolutely. 100 small things which had puzzled him in the past crowded through his mind. He often wondered why it was that Kit had remained so small and slight. The other boys were growing tall, broadening out, developing magnificent new muscles on their arms and shoulders. He'd never understood either why Kit had always been so modest, turning away from the others when he undressed, creeping to the lavatories only at the quietest moments. He always hung back too when the others had wrestled, slipping quietly away to avoid a challenge, not seeming to care for Tom's taunts and jeers. He even walks like a girl, John thought, the revelation filling him with disgust. He moves like one. It was almost worse than losing his friend in battle. This discovery was not only a loss, it was a betrayal too. "Why?" he burst out angrily. "Why did you do it? Pretend to be a boy. Why didn't you just tell me?" "I tried to, just now," Kit said pleadingly. "I've wanted to so many times. I couldn't. A secret, it's like a terrible burden. You had had to carry it too. You would have treated me differently if you'd known." would have been even more dangerous for both of us. He turned to Mr. Erskine. Is it a very serious crime, Mr. Erskine, to be a girl? Kit said anxiously. Will I be flogged or just put in irons? Neither, Mr. Erskine said, but you will be required to tell the whole truth and explain yourself to the captain as soon as you are strong enough to leave Mr. Catskill's care. For the time being, you will stay here, and you will not talk to anyone. And you, John, you will keep the matter to yourself. Do you understand? No word of this must pass your lips. Now, I believe we have trespassed on the patience of our good surgeon for long enough. Get back to your quarters. As for you, mademoiselle, I wish you a speedy recovery.